Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's presentation on behalf of Health Buddha. I am your host, Dr. Brianne Callanan, naturopathic and functional medicine doctor, and I am very excited today to have the opportunity to discuss one of my favorite topics, which is the connection between hormones and resistant weight loss with Dr. Pamela Frank. This presentation is being recorded. If you're a participant, you are in listen-only mode, and we encourage you to please post your questions in the comments section. Dr. Pamela Frank is a naturopathic doctor practicing since 1999. She enjoys helping individuals with a variety of health conditions such as menopause, perimenopause, hypothyroidism, weight loss, and much more. Dr. Pamela Frank uses the natural treatment approach that may include acupuncture, herbal medicine, nutrition, diet, vitamin supplements, and other natural remedies. Welcome, Dr. Frank, and thank you for taking the time to share your knowledge on such an important yet complex topic. To kick off the conversation, let me ask you, what are some of the signs and symptoms that individuals may present with that could make them consider whether or not their resistant weight loss is due to hormones?
Thank you, Dr. Callanan, for the introduction and for the welcome. Well, lots of things that people need to look for. And when I see people in my office, a lot of times they're coming because they're frustrated. They've been trying to lose weight. There's so much information available to them online about how they can go about losing weight. They've already tried and they're struggling. And a lot of times they'll come because they think there's a thyroid problem. And they've been to the doctor. The doctors maybe run some superficial testing for thyroid. They didn't find anything. But they're still convinced that there's a hormonal problem of some sort, but usually leaning towards thyroid. But then they'll come and it'll turn out that maybe they've got acne and they've also got hair loss, or their cycles are a little bit irregular, or they've got some signs that maybe hormones are not quite balanced. Periods are very heavy or very crampy. They're very irritable before their period starts, PMS symptoms, PMDD kind of symptoms. So all these, when people come and they're presenting with that, it's like, maybe it's not your thyroid, maybe it is, and maybe we need to delve a little more deeply into your thyroid and actually do a bit more extensive testing than what has been offered so far. But maybe it is also something to do with your thyroid and your hormones. Maybe it is that your reproductive hormones are not quite right. And especially when we see those kind of signs and symptoms coming in, that they're saying their acne is bad and it's worse just before their period starts. Their mood goes in the toilet just before their period starts, and they're really struggling with trying to lose the weight.
And what would be the first step for an individual who, has heard, you just need to eat less and you just need to move more, and they've tried that and it's just not working? When they're looking for some other options or some different types of different therapies, is the first step testing, or is the first step to have an initial appointment, or what exactly do you do with these patients?
So for me, and I assume most naturopathic doctors, we have to do that initial assessment to be able to order testing. But even a lot of times people will want to be kind of one step ahead when they come, and that makes perfect sense. So they're like, well, why don't I go to my doctor, ask them to check my hormones first, then I'll come and see you. The problem with that approach, and it's fine to try that, but is this often doctors don't order the full panel of hormones. They will order maybe check estrogen and progesterone, LH and FSH, which are sort of basic in terms of hormones. In addition to that, I usually would like to see DHEA, total testosterone, sometimes dihydrotestosterone, prolactin. So these are things that if you just ask your doctor, please check my hormones, often don't get done. The other problem with hormones, there's several. One is that the ranges that the lab supplies to your doctor to tell your doctor what's considered normal is often very broad, and everybody pretty much falls inside the ranges unless there is something really abnormal. So that's where the ranges are not ideal. They're not based on what's optimal. And a lot of times as naturopathic doctors, that's what we're aiming for. We want your levels of things to be optimal so that your health is ideal. We don't just want you to be falling in some kind of arbitrary range that was set by the lab. And I'm speaking from experience here. I used to be a laboratory technologist before I was a naturopathic doctor. That the way we set lab ranges is faulty. We take an average of a group of people that we've tested previously and call that a normal range. We do some statistical analysis to it, but at the end of the day, we're taking 100 people perhaps that we don't know what their health status is. And a lot of times the people that are getting testing are people who have a problem. That's why they're getting testing. So we're taking 100 people that are getting tested for their hormones because they have an obvious sign that there's a problem with their hormones. Then we're averaging their results and calling this a normal range. So we end up coming up with this range that's really wide. Everybody falls inside it unless there's something really terribly abnormally wrong. And excuse me, and then we're using that as a gauge for telling people that their results are fine. So it's not a good system. When people do come to me and they've had hormones tested already, a lot of times I'll take what they've brought me in terms of results. We'll go through it. I'll go through it step by step with them and say, okay, here's what was tested. Here's what your numbers are like. Here's ideally where you want it to be. And here's how we'll work to getting it to that level. And a lot of times the results are not entirely complete, that there's a few tests that should be done that haven't been done. A lot of times they are edging towards either of the limits for the range. So for example, yesterday I had somebody who her DHEAS, which is a weaker male type hormone, her level was, excuse me, the upper limit of the range was 9.7. She was at 9.6. So she's just barely hanging in terms of the range. And she's got obvious signs that something's not right as far as her hormones, acne and hair loss and irregular periods, which are all signs of too much DHEAS. So that's where the lab ranges are not perfect. We have to kind of look at them with a bit of knowledge and go, okay, maybe we want your level to be a little bit better than that in order to back you away from that upper limit so that you're not experiencing these symptoms and you're also not struggling so much in terms of weight loss. So yeah, the kind of things that I would do is I do think testing is extremely important. Guessing doesn't work. A lot of times similar imbalances in hormones can look the same. So it could look like there's too much testosterone when in fact there's too little estrogen. So we need to know the exact numbers just to know this is exactly what the picture is. And I like thorough kind of panels in terms of hormone testing. Testing, except often with doctors, they might not measure everything. If they do measure everything, the ranges are not great. So if you're interpreting the levels based on the ranges the lab is supplying, it's not always going to be necessarily what you want it to be or what's going to give you the best health. Yeah, I do think testing is very important, but first steps are usually we need to get together, do the initial assessment, go through your health in detail so I know what is appropriate to test for. And then often people will go back and ask their family doctor if he or she's willing to order the test. If they are, great, a lot of them would be covered by OHIP, but then it doesn't cost people anything to do the testing. If it is that the naturopathic, or sorry, the doctor is not willing to order the blood work, then they'll come back to me and say, okay, my doctor would do this and this and this, but they won't do this. So then can you order that test? And that's the usual process.
Can you talk about as well the importance of testing based off of whether or not you have a menstrual cycle or not? Is there a particular time individuals should be prioritizing having this testing done?
Well, that's a really good question too, because often when people do go either to their family doctor or somebody else to get testing done, they might just say, okay, here's the form, and not specify like, here's where you should do this test, here's where you should do that test. And there are two kind of crucial times in someone who's menstruating to when to do testing. One is day 3 of the period. At that point, we usually want to know what estrogen's like. There's a specific target for estrogen at that point that tells us whether their estrogen is optimal or not. And the only caveat with that is that at that point, it might be good on day 3. We can't necessarily project or extrapolate from that and say, okay, it carries on throughout the rest of the cycle. Every other day in the cycle is normal for estrogen. But it does give us, at least we know we can target where estrogen should be for day 3. If it's good there, we can keep our fingers crossed that the rest of the cycle will also be good. The other key time to measure hormones is a week after ovulating. So Progesterone is usually measured then, that we want to measure that then because you don't make progesterone until after you ovulate, and you typically don't ovulate till around middle of the cycle. So if you ovulate around day 14 or 15, a week after that is the day to measure the progesterone, because there's a peak of progesterone at that point. So we want to see 1 week after ovulating, what is that peak like? Are you heading towards like an optimal level at that point, or is it kind of suboptimal? Progesterone is really important in terms of the influence on weight loss because it revs up your metabolism. When you ovulate, your body temperature goes up by about 0.5 degree. And that 0.5 degree rise in temperature, the only way you can increase your body temperature is to burn more calories to maintain that higher temperature. So for women who are not ovulating, and that applies to either women who have something like PCOS where they're not ovulating, or menopausal women who are not ovulating, they're not getting progesterone. So it makes it harder for them to lose weight because they're not getting the progesterone metabolism boost that they're supposed to get. In women that are menopausal, there's not really anything to do about that. You're not going to go back to ovulating. In women who have PCOS, even if they never intend to have children, it's important to get that ovulation going if they're struggling with weight, because you want to get that little 2-week metabolism boost.
And is there some core reasons or trends that you see for this lower level of progesterone or the lack of ovulation in your practice?
So PCOS, definitely. Women with PCOS have anovulatory cycles, just meaning that they don't ovulate. And the reason for that is multiple, often assumed to be high testosterone, and sometimes it is high testosterone. It can be high DHEAS, it can be high prolactin, it can be underactive thyroid, it can be HPA axis dysfunction, where the whole endocrine system just doesn't seem to be working particularly well. Blood work, again, is the best way to get an answer to that and to know like what exactly is going on. Why aren't the ovaries functioning the way that they're supposed to? Those are the most common reasons why I'll see people not ovulate when they should be ovulating, when they are like pre-menopause. Again, postmenopausal, it's expected that there won't be ovulating and you won't be making progesterone. There's a teeny bit of progesterone that can be produced postmenopause by the adrenal glands in a form called 17-hydroxyprogesterone. So that's where, to me, the thing I can do for women that are postmenopause is make sure that their adrenal glands are working well, make sure that the HPA axis is working well, so that they're getting that tiny bit of 17-hydroxyprogesterone once they're not ovulating anymore.
And what would be some general ideas or different strategies that you might use to improve adrenal function in postmenopausal women?
Yeah, so it's kind of standard across most naturopathic doctors, I would assume, but we're looking at adaptogens, which are herbs that just help your body adapt to and handle stress more easily. My favorite ones are Schisandra. Schisandra is a Chinese berry that is good for the ovaries as well as being good for the adrenal glands. So I like it because it kind of gives me two benefits, and it's kind of a female-specific adaptogen. And the second one is centella, which is also a Chinese herb. And that one's nice because it's a bit anti-inflammatory. That can sometimes help people with weight to get some inflammation down. If there's more inflammation going on, then insulin levels will tend to be higher because of that increased inflammation. So that's where I like centella for the anti-inflammatory and adaptogen benefits, and then Schisandra because it's good for the ovaries as well as being good for the adrenal glands. And then in addition to that, the core things that the adrenals need are certain vitamins and minerals. B5, B6, vitamin C, magnesium, and zinc are important for adrenal glands and the HPA axis. So HPA axis stands for hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis. It's the communication from the brain to the adrenals. Sometimes it's not the adrenals themselves. Sometimes it's more that communication isn't functioning particularly well. So we want to make sure that that's all supported. But B5 and 6, magnesium, zinc, vitamin C are important for the whole HPA axis. And then Magnesium B6 are important for lots of things, including 300 different enzyme reactions that depend on those as cofactors. They're common deficiencies. Magnesium, something like 40% of us are deficient in magnesium, something like 50% of us are deficient in zinc. Soil is over farmed, and that means it's depleted in certain vitamins and minerals. So it's easy for people to become deficient in those vitamins and minerals. So anyway, I think those are the most common deficiencies that I'll see, and not always easily measured either, because the logical question people will have is, well, if I need more magnesium, can I just do a blood test and find out if I need more magnesium? The thing I find with mineral values in terms of blood work is the body will tend to prioritize the blood. So the blood will remain relatively stable for levels of things like magnesium and zinc, despite the fact that tissues might be deprived of it. And the body will tend to take out of the tissues to place it in the blood to keep the blood level where the blood level needs to be at the expense of the tissues. So it's fairly evident that there's maybe a magnesium deficiency, and yet the blood level is fine. The best example of that is osteoporosis. Somebody with osteoporosis who obviously doesn't have enough calcium in their bones, if you did a blood test for calcium, the blood test will be fine.
Interesting. So it's not a true reflection of tissue levels when you look at the levels in the blood.
With mineral levels, I think so, yeah.
Exactly. One of the things you mentioned as an underlying issue for patients with hormone-related concerns, as well as weight loss resistance, is this level of chronic inflammation. Is there anything that you recommend from a dietary strategy to assist with levels of inflammation?
Oh, absolutely. That's, to me, diet and exercise are the two big movers and shakers as far as things that people can do. And they know that a lot of times they're like, yeah, I know I need to exercise. I know I need to cut back on eating junk food. And the problem for a lot of people is that there are certain foods that are driving up inflammation. And sometimes that's adding to their hunger signals because their stomach's inflamed. Their body feels like I need to put food in there. It feels better when I put food in there, but it's not truly hunger. It's irritation in the stomach. So removing the most inflammatory foods sometimes helps, dairy and gluten being probably the two worst ones. So if we're kind of guessing at that, I would most often take out dairy and gluten. There is food sensitivity or food allergy testing that can be done to see what foods exactly might be driving up inflammation for this particular person. So a lot of times it's that. The things people also know that they need to cut back to try to lose weight are carbs and sugar. Those things will also tend to drive up inflammation because when you ingest more of those, insulin goes up. And when insulin goes up, inflammation goes up. And then that can be a bit of a vicious cycle because when inflammation goes up, you need more insulin to get the same effect. So you end up with this sort of snowball thing happening. And that's where I would usually just try to have people cut back on carbs and sugar where they can, try to cut out gluten and dairy if it does seem like there's a lot of inflammation. And signs of that might be things like joint pain or muscle weakness, headaches, sinus problems, skin rashes, anything to do with digestion, bloating, gas, constipation, diarrhea. So people sometimes need to just, monitor themselves. If they see certain foods that seem to be causing them to feel more bloated, it's probably a good thing to take out because it's obviously driving up some inflammation in the gut.
So it sounds like the nutrition and exercise is really important, but when the hormones are off, you almost tend to go towards the wrong types of foods, and it's this vicious cycle.
Right. Well, people will self-medicate with food sometimes. They will go often for carbs and sugar because those provide a bit more serotonin, which makes them feel better. So they become somewhat addicted, and also dopamine gets produced when you ingest sugar. So then you get addicted to the sugar intake. It's just because the drive to get the dopamine or the drive to increase the serotonin can be so overwhelming. It's very difficult too post-menopause because of the hormonal changes that happen at menopause. When estrogen goes down, and it's going to go down at menopause, then you become more insulin resistant. And when progesterone goes down at menopause, then your metabolism slows down. And having experienced all of this firsthand, I gained 30 pounds at menopause I was always eating healthy and exercising, always. And so those things were still in place. And then suddenly 30 pounds of extra weight came on. So it does require, post-menopause requires a lot more effort. And it's very difficult for people to do that. And having, again, speaking from experience, having gained 30 pounds, I've managed to take 20 pounds of that off, but it's been a lot of work. And it's not the same reward for that work as you get when you're younger. That when you're younger, you might lose a pound or two a week when you're putting in that effort. And that helps because it keeps you motivated. You're seeing that the scale's improving and things are getting better. But post-menopause, it's more like about a pound a month, which is very difficult to stay motivated, keep working, doing all that effort for only the reward of losing a pound a month. So anyways, it's hard work post-menopause. And so it's quite obvious hormones are at play there because you don't have the same level of estrogen, you don't have the same level of progesterone. But it can be done. So again, speaking from experience, it can be done, but it is a lot more work and a less of a return on that investment. But in terms of health, it's the best thing you can do is to lose any extra weight and maintain a healthy weight.
Now, at what age should individuals be starting to think perhaps some of their symptoms are related to perimenopause? Because sometimes this could be a lot younger than individuals anticipate.
Right. Well, and it's a good question because the average age for actual menopause is 52. But perimenopause, which is the lead up to menopause, I see typically is around 45. So periods start to get a little less regular. Ovulation isn't necessarily happening every month. Symptoms are sometimes starting to set in of hot flashes or night sweats or difficulty sleeping or anxiety or depression or weight gain. And so mid-40s is kind of typical. And from there till 52 or so which is where your period stops for a whole year, and then you're considered fully in menopause. But some women will start even as early as late 30s that they'll start to see some signs of perimenopause. Now, I think that's too young, and I think for a lot of women, if they're seeing that in their late 30s, then we maybe can work to get that reversed and get them back to having sort of regular ovulation, regular cycles until they hit about mid-40s. Mid-40s, I think, is pretty typical and not likely that you're going to necessarily get someone back to ovulating every single month. Although I have seen that. I have had women in their mid-40s that were feeling like it's too soon, and we got them back to like a few more years of regular ovulation.
And I think that's an important point too, that you don't have to wait a year of not having cycles to investigate your hormones and decide whether or not you could benefit from some of these treatments, because perimenopause is much earlier and can last a lot longer than we otherwise anticipate.
Right. And if you don't have to have perimenopause for 7 years, you could have it for 2 or 3 years, would be a lot better. And believe me, again, having been through that. The other thing that I wish somebody had told me was the way you're feeling as you're going through perimenopause and or once you are at first into menopause is not going to last forever, because some of those symptoms will just gradually subside and you start to feel like yourself again. That in the throes of it, it's not enjoyable, and the symptoms you don't know, like it feels like maybe this is going to be me for the rest of my life, and that at least hasn't been my experience, and with people that I've worked with hasn't been their experience. That we can mitigate some of those symptoms if they're troublesome. I personally, some naturopathic doctors will use hormone replacement therapy. I choose not to do that. I just feel like I would rather, from a naturopathic standpoint, try to get your body to do what it's naturally intended to do on its own without the addition of hormones from external sources. But other naturopathic doctors have a different view on that. We'll use them.
And one of the things, just to recap, so it sounds like you want to, if you're having any of these symptoms or if you're seeing weight come on, you want to speak to somebody to do an initial assessment, then have a look at what comprehensive testing needs to be done. And the main point there is looking at the ranges, just because they're really broad, does not necessarily mean optimal. There's an important time to test, as well as oftentimes not enough testing is being done. Is there anything else that you can add that would help individuals, or things that you've seen move the needle the most in terms of really going through perimenopause with ease?
I would usually come back to HPA axis, because you can still maintain a small amount of progesterone from adrenal glands post-menopause, and you can also maintain, because when your ovaries shut down, you lose about half of your testosterone. Testosterone helps with muscle mass. Having better muscle mass means being more metabolically active, so then you're burning more calories even when you're sleeping. So losing that half, menopause is really it does a number in terms of being able to lose or maintain a healthy weight. The losing half the testosterone, losing most of the estrogen, losing most of the progesterone, all of that conspires to making people be more prone to gaining weight. But that's where keeping adrenal glands and thyroid working at their best is probably the best way you can mitigate that, because you can still get a little bit of progesterone from your adrenal glands. You can get the half of the testosterone that comes from the adrenal glands, you can still maintain that. You can still produce a little bit of estrogen, provided you've got the testosterone to use as a building block to make the estrogen, which comes back to adrenal glands again. And DHEAS, which is a weaker male hormone from the adrenals, that 100% comes from the adrenal glands. DHEAS acts a little bit to balance estrogen receptors, that it helps them kind of regulate up or down depending on kind of dialing up or down, or the estrogen depending on what your body needs. So that's where I like to keep adrenal glands functioning well. And I think that's the best thing people can do to get through perimenopause, menopause with as much ease as possible, and as little disruption as possible. The other is where magnesium becomes important again, because magnesium acts a little bit like a brain chemical called GABA. GABA is a calming neurotransmitter. It helps you feel more relaxed. And there can be a lot of anxiety and depression that happens with perimenopause and menopause. And magnesium can activate a little bit of the GABA receptor, so you get some of that calming. And when you're losing the progesterone helps your brain to use GABA. So you're losing that. You got to try to get that back somehow. And that's, again, where the magnesium will step in a little bit to help with GABA.
Fantastic. So you spoke about B vitamins, magnesium, zinc, vitamin C, and adaptogens for adrenal support. Is there other lifestyle factors that individuals could do to have a look at supporting their adrenal glands?
Yeah, definitely. So circadian rhythm is important. And this is where I think a lot of people's adrenal glands are suffering, is that we're all kind of on our devices until 11 o'clock at night, or working, trying to catch up on emails till 11 o'clock at night. And adrenal glands have a set schedule, and their schedule is dictated based on daylight hours. So they peak in the morning around 6 or 7. You should get a really good cortisol peak from your adrenal glands in the morning, which is to give you energy, wake you up, drive down your melatonin, help you feel refreshed, help you get going, help to reduce inflammation in your body. People think of cortisol as being this bad hormone, but we need a certain amount, and you want it at a certain time of the day. So you want a good peak of cortisol first thing in the morning, wake you up, get you recharged, get you out of bed, reduce the inflammation, get the melatonin down so you don't feel sleepy, and then get you going. And then it gradually should taper off throughout the day to being lowest between about 8 p.m. and 4 a.m. So that at that point, you want to be relaxing by about 8 o'clock, unwinding, bringing it down a notch, and then asleep by about 10 o'clock or so that you've got that window where adrenal glands are at their lowest. Most of that is spent sleeping. It just gives the adrenal glands a chance to recover, so that then you can be refreshed and recharged for the next day. So then they'll start winding up again and peaking around 6 or 7 in the morning. So yeah, working with your adrenal glands rather than against them, because sometimes people will say, oh, well, I stay up till 1 o'clock in the morning because it's a quiet time and I can get caught up on my emails and then I'll go to bed, but I'll still get my 8 hours and I'll get up at 9. But unfortunately, adrenal glands don't really shift their schedule because their schedule is based on daylight hours. So working with adrenal glands rather than against them is important. Exercise is important because it's one of the best stress reducers there is. And being outside is also one of the best stress reducers there is. So exercising outdoors is better than exercising indoors for lowering cortisol levels. But the thing for people is that sometimes they push it too much. So then they're doing endurance exercise. So they're doing marathons or half marathons or triathlons. And again, being guilty of doing triathlons in the past, it's hard on your adrenal glands. That endurance exercise is really hard on the adrenal glands. I find if people want to do that kind of activity, we have to be doing something to kind of counter that by supporting adrenal glands better. So stress reduction exercise, trying to maintain a healthy circadian rhythm. Those are the 3 big lifestyle things for me, for people to keep their adrenal glands working well, but not overdoing the exercise because that it can be that people don't go a bit too far with that. Other with exercise is in terms of weight purposes, that there does need to be a little bit of intensity with exercise, that it doesn't have to be the every day as intense exercise, but I think where people are struggling with weight, that if they're just doing yoga and going for walks, that's good for the adrenal glands. Those are kind of relaxing activities. But there does also, I think, need to be a little bit of intensity sprinkled in, maybe 3 or 4 times a week, and maybe it's only 10 or 15 minutes. But that intensity is part of what helps your body to respond to insulin better, so you get insulin levels down.
So it sounds like a mixture, right? That perfect balance for each individual of the restorative, but also when your body is able to do it, a little bit of the intensity sprinkled in.
Right, exactly.
Love that. Well, thank you so much for all of your valuable information today. That was a jam-packed presentation. I really appreciate it, and I hope everybody found it valuable. We are going to post the links to connect with Dr. Pamela Frank in the comment section below. So if you have any additional questions or you'd like to set up an appointment, I would encourage you to follow that link that's been provided. Thank you so much for today. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you.